The father wound is an invisible imprint left when the father is absent, emotionally unreachable, or unable to provide safety, protection, or unconditional love. It's not about blame. It's about holding the spaces inside you that were never held. The father wound isn't simply grief for a man who was absent, whether physically or emotionally. It's the long-term impact of growing up without consistent protection, guidance, or emotional attunement. This wound runs deeper than disappointment. It is an imprint in the nervous system, a pattern of vigilance that begins in childhood and echoes into adulthood. The work of inner child healing rarely shows up as memory alone. It hides in the body, in the tightening of the chest before truth, in the impulse to please or perform, in the quiet ache that whispers, I must earn love to keep it. For many, the external story looks stable, careers, achievements, relationships, but internally the child's self is still scanning for signs of safety, still waiting to be chosen. Common adult echoes include deep struggles with self-worth, fear of abandonment or rejection, difficulty trusting masculine energy, overachieving or overgiving to prove value, and attraction to emotionally unavailable partners. Healing the father wound begins when we stop trying to think our way out of the ache and start listening to what the body has been holding. Inner child healing teaches the nervous system that safety and love are no longer conditional. This is the beginning of self-belonging, the moment we stop chasing love and start receiving it. For many, the father was there, but not with you. He may have lived in the same home, fulfilled his duties, even said the right words, yet something essential never arrived. Emotional presence. This is what I call the unseen wound. It doesn't always appear in chaos or cruelty. It hides inside the silence. The moments you reached for connection and met only distance. Inner child healing reveals these patterns again and again, not just in memory, but through the body. The tightness of the jaw that holds back the truth, the exhaustion of always being the strong one, the fear of being too much, the quiet collapse that follows rejection. When a father is emotionally detached, the child internalizes the absence as information. Love must be earned, presence is conditional, who I am is not enough. Over time, this becomes a nervous system blueprint. You learn to anticipate moods, to perform for affection, to overfunction in relationships just to stay safe. And long before you ever entered romance, you learned to fall in love with potential, to stay loyal to absence, to confuse longing with love. Inner child healing helps us understand these patterns for what they are, survival strategies, not flaws. This isn't pathology, it's protection. Your system repeats what it learned in childhood. Reach for what feels familiar, even when it hurts. Healing begins when we name what was once invisible, when we stop excusing emotional neglect as just how he was, when we finally meet the child within, who is still waiting for a father's gaze that says you are enough exactly as you are. Through emotional recalibration therapy, we bring safety back into that space, teaching the body that love can be calm, consistent, and reciprocal. This is how absence becomes presence, not because he returns, but because you do. Every personal story sits within a wider inheritance. Behind so many absent or emotionally unreachable fathers stands a system that taught men to provide, not to feel, to protect but never to reveal tenderness. This is the patriarchal wound, the cultural conditioning that confuses dominance with strength and detachment with dignity. It tells men that vulnerability is weakness, that care makes them soft, and that silence is noble. And so entire generations learned to love through absence, to parent through performance, to mistake control for care. When a father's gaze is absent or unpredictable, the child's nervous system registers that as uncertainty and danger. Without steady attunement, the body stops expecting safety. It learns to anticipate threat instead. This is how early emotional absence becomes a physiological imprint. A child's system designed for co-regulation adapts to self-protection. The heart races in moments that should feel calm. The breath shortens in presence of love. The body braces for loss before it even arrives. What we later call anxiety is often the echo of that unmet need. What we call low self-worth is the residue of invisibility, and what we call boundary collapse is the muscle memory of merging for survival. None of this is weakness. It's physiology. The nervous system doesn't speak in words, it speaks in patterns. It carries every unspoken moment of I wanted to cry but didn't. I needed comfort but stayed quiet. I reached out but no one reached back. Emotional recalibration therapy works directly with these imprints through breath, awareness, and somatic repair. We don't just tell the story differently. We teach the body that it no longer needs to brace. This is how regulation returns, how peace becomes possible, how you finally start to live in the present, not in the echo. The father wound rarely begins with us. It is passed quietly from one generation to the next. Fathers who were once sons carrying their own unspoken ache. Most emotionally distant men were never shown tenderness themselves. They were taught that silence is strength, that withholding is control, that love is earned through provision, not presence. This conditioning becomes the family's emotional language, a dialect of distance, and so the wound is repeated until someone names it, until someone refuses to pass it on. Inner child healing helps us trace this lineage with compassion, not blame. We learn to see the wound not as a personal failure, but as an inheritance we can finally lay down. In this work, we don't excuse the absence, but we understand it. We stop waiting for repair from those who could not give it and begin offering it to ourselves. This is how generational patterns end, not by punishment, but by presence, by learning to give the safety we were once denied. Through emotional recalibration therapy, that healing becomes embodied, a nervous system taught to recognize love as calm, protection as consistent, and self-worth as inherent. And from that reclamation, a new pattern begins. I sat in the stillness of a chapel, coloured light falling across my father's face, red, then blue, then green, and realised I was truly seeing him for the first time. He was gone, and yet in that quiet, something long frozen inside me began to soften. I could finally hold the little girl who had waited decades for him to show up. That moment, raw, unexpected, strangely peaceful, revealed what I now witness so often in my own healing. We cannot rewrite the past, but we can meet the part of us that still carries it and offer the safety it never had. My father spoke with the clipped elegance of another era, precise vowels, perfectly enunciated consonants, a man for whom emotion was to be contained, not expressed. When I met him, I was 22. Not long after, I found myself at his side again, only this time he was gone. I studied his stillness, the way the light from the stained glass played across his face, and I noticed for the first time how alike we were. And then the truth landed. I had waited my entire life for a relationship that would never come. Anger rose first. Why hadn't he fought for me? Why did he wait for me to find him? Why did he choose silence over ever showing up? Every cell in my body screamed for an answer that would never arrive. But grief has its own intelligence. As I sat with him and with myself, I began to understand what I now teach every day through emotional recalibration therapy. Healing does not mean forgiving the wound. It means facing it with presence. My father was not cruel, only incapable. He had been taught, as so many men are, that provision replaces presence, that silence equals strength. His absence was not malice, but inheritance, a language of distance passed down through generations. In that chapel, I realised it was my turn to break the pattern, to become the adult who could finally offer the child what she had always needed: protection, belonging, and peace. That's why I know, deep in my bones, how essential this work is, why inner child healing and emotional recalibration therapy matter so profoundly, because no one should have to spend decades of their life at the mercy of old attachment wounds, waiting for someone else to make them whole. Every personal story sits within a wider inheritance. Behind so many absent or emotionally unreachable fathers stands a system that taught men to provide, not to feel, to protect but never to reveal tenderness. This is the patriarchal wound, the cultural conditioning that confuses dominance with strength and detachment with dignity. It tells men that vulnerability is weakness, that care makes them soft, and that silence is noble. And so entire generations learned to love through absence, to parent through performance, to mistake control for care. Inner child healing helps us see this clearly. What we internalized as personal rejection was often a symptom of collective disconnection. Our fathers were not born detached. They were shaped by a world that rewarded suppression and shamed sensitivity. The tragedy is that this distortion robbed both father and child of intimacy. When we begin to heal, we don't only restore our own hearts, we interrupt a cultural pattern. We start to redefine masculine energy as presence, not pressure, as groundedness, not control. We give both ourselves and future generations permission to be whole. Through emotional recalibration therapy, this becomes embodied work, a rebalancing of the nervous system where strength and softness are no longer opposites. We learn that power can coexist with empathy and that protection can coexist with peace. The patriarchal wound may have shaped the world we were born into, but it doesn't have to shape the world we create from here. Not every father is absent by choice. Some stand silently beside the storm, watching as the mother dominates, berates, or humiliates, too frightened or conditioned to intervene. Others become instruments of that control, carrying out punishments decreed by her anger, even when their own hearts ache with conflict. For the child, this dynamic cuts deep. It creates a paradox where the person who might protect you also becomes a source of fear. Safety becomes impossible because danger wears two faces, one overt, one compliant. In inner child healing, this is where we often meet a layered trauma, the loss of safety in both archetypes, the mother who wounds and the father who cannot shield. The body learns that love is conditional, that protection is unreliable, that silence equals survival. For daughters, this can evolve into a blueprint of ambivalence towards men, a yearning for strength intertwined with mistrust of power, an attraction to dominance coupled with contempt for weakness. She may seek men who seem decisive, only to find the same emotional unavailability wearing a different mask. For sons, the imprint can manifest as paralysis or appeasement, the fear of conflict, the instinct to comply, the belief that strength must be quiet or risk becoming cruelty. This is a wound of power distortion, of what happens when the masculine is shamed, suppressed or weaponized. Healing it asks us to reimagine father energy not as dominance or passivity, but as presence, steady, discerning, accountable. Through healing, we bring both polarities, strength and softness, back into harmony. We teach the nervous system that safety is found not in control or collapse, but in truth, that protection can exist without punishment and love can stand firm without fear. The ache of an absent or powerless father is not just about loss. It's about longing for a safety that never came. It is the grief of almosts and what-ifs, of remembering without memories, of craving a presence that your nervous system still believes might return one day. In inner child healing, this is often where the deepest mourning begins, not for a man, but for the child you might have been if you had been loved and protected as you deserved. It's the moment when the adult self realizes she's been living her life trying to earn what should have been freely given. That grief can be disorientating. You may find yourself missing the version of a father that never existed, or replaying stories that end with rescue instead of rupture. You may still look for his reflection in the eyes of lovers, mentors, bosses, hoping someone will finally look back with the steadiness you once needed. Healing begins when you allow yourself to grieve what was never real, to name the fantasy for what it was, a child's hope, to stop waiting for him to return and instead turn inward, turn towards the parts of you still waiting by the window. Through emotional recalibration therapy, this grief becomes sacred work, a reclaiming of worth, a rewiring of safety, a remembering that love does not have to hurt to count. We cannot rewrite the past, but we can rewrite the meanings we made from it. We can learn that what was absent no longer has to define what we allow in. You can miss what you never knew, and you can still become who you were always meant to be, whole, held, and home within yourself. Healing the father wound is not about erasing history. It's about releasing the meanings that once defined it. It's about learning that your worth was never meant to depend on another person's capacity to love you. In inner child healing, we don't rescue the younger self, we reparent her or him. We meet her exactly where she is, hurt, hopeful, still waiting, and we teach her what safety feels like in the present tense. We breathe where she once held her breath, we speak where she once stayed silent. We offer the protection she was denied, not through fantasy, but through embodiment. This is the essence of emotional recalibration therapy, the process of teaching the nervous system that it no longer needs to brace for abandonment or shrink for approval. Through somatic awareness, hypnosis, and compassionate witnessing, the body learns new possibilities, that calm can replace chaos, that love can arrive gently, that safety can live inside you, not outside of you. Healing this wound doesn't make the past irrelevant, it makes it integrated. The ache becomes a teacher instead of a trigger. Anger turns into clarity, grief turns into groundedness, and forgiveness, when it comes, is not absolution, it's release. When the father wound begins to soften, something remarkable happens. The energy, once bound in longing, becomes available for creation. What was absence turns into space. What was silence begins to hum with new possibility. In inner child healing, this is the stage of reimagination, redefining what father energy means on your own terms. It's no longer about him, it's about the qualities your system still craves: protection, consistency, guidance, grounded strength, loving accountability. For many, this reclamation begins through symbol and archetype. Consider visualizing Vasa, proving that power can be both firm and kind. Find your own archetypes: a teacher, a friend, a spiritual figure, even a version of your future self who knows how to stand tall. Each one helps the body relearn that father energy can exist without fear, coercion, or control. The father wound forms when a child grows up without consistent protection, presence, or emotional attunement. It may come from a father who was physically absent, emotionally distant, or powerless within the family dynamic, or from a culture that teaches men to provide but not to feel. The result is an attachment rupture, the gap between what the child needed and what was received. That gap becomes a pattern in the nervous system: vigilance, self-blame, and the quiet belief I must earn love to be safe. As adults, this wound appears as low self-worth, people-pleasing, anxiety and intimacy, or attraction to emotionally unavailable partners. Unhealed father wounds often shape our attachment patterns long into adulthood. You might overgive, avoid conflict, mistake intensity for intimacy, be drawn to partners who feel familiar in their unpredictability. Those with this wound are particularly vulnerable to narcissistic dynamics and cycles of emotional exploitation. When love was once inconsistent, the nervous system confuses volatility with connection, and empathy becomes survival. This is why many with strong empathic or caregiving traits find themselves magnetized to partners who mirror their unmet father story. Healing is not about blame, it's about liberation. It means witnessing what happened or didn't happen with honesty, then releasing the self-blame, shame, or silence that grew around it. You can honour your story without carrying its weight forever. Healing is not about blame, it's about liberation. It means witnessing what happened or didn't happen with honesty, then releasing the self-blame, shame, or silence that grew around it. You can honour your story without carrying its weight forever.